After Andrea Yates killed her 5 children, should she have gone to hospital or should she have gone to prison? Hello cruel world. This is a video about the shocking case of Andrea Yates. She was a nurse who drowned her 5 children on the 20th of June 2021 in Houston. This is a Psych for Sore Minds, the only YouTube channel that covers true crime and mental illness and is hosted by a professional consultant forensic psychiatrist. So I'm your host, Dr. 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐜𝐡 𝐅𝐨𝐫. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living, so you don't have to. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. My previous video, I went through the background of the case and the diagnosis. And in this video, I'm going to do like a deep dive and I'm going to tell you my opinions on the weird and the controversial aspects of this case. In this video, I'm going to answer the following questions. What mistakes did the psychiatrist treating Yates make? Spoiler alert, there were plenty of them. I will tell you what catatonia is. I'll tell you what is wrong with the evidence in Yates's trial and why this led to a retrial. So Yates is currently detained in a psychiatric institute, so I will tell you, will she be released, and if so, when? And my personal favourite question, would things have been different if this happened in the UK? So you should really check out my previous vid first if you want to catch up with the details of the case. But if you can't be bothered and if you want a brief recap, I will tell you the following. So this is a shocking case. Yates is a nurse who drowned her 5 children on the 20th of June in Houston. She had a number of different psychiatric diagnoses, including postpartum psychosis. And after the birth of her 4th child, she actually attempted suicide by overdose, and she was discharged from hospital before she was fully ready because the insurance company couldn't pay or didn't want to pay for any longer for her to be in hospital. She was prescribed antidepressants, but she didn't take it. And that would never happen in the UK. So just to inform any foreign viewers, we do not have an insurance-based healthcare system. All of our healthcare is provided free to everybody under the NHS, the National Health Service, although you can pay for private treatments in some special hospitals, but not if you're sectioned under the Mental Health Act. So that would not be relevant for Yates's case. In the UK, patients are only discharged when their consultant psychiatrists believe that they're ready for the community and that they're safe. So had this been in the UK, Yates would have not have been discharged until she was better, but there's no guarantee that she would have taken her antidepressant medication after discharge. Unlike antipsychotics, antidepressants don't come in like an injectable form, so the patients have to comply if they're going to take the medication. So after the death of Yates's father in February 2001, so we're talking about a few months before the killings, she deteriorated again. She stopped talking, stopped drinking, she wasn't nursing a baby, she even started pulling out her own hair. And she thought video cameras were watching her and the television characters were speaking to her, and she was mute and catatonic. So what is catatonic, you might ask? So being catatonic or catatonia is a group of symptoms. It usually involves a lack of movement, a lack of communication, but can also involve like extreme agitation, confusion, restlessness. And they also generally don't respond to other people or what's going on around them. What's quite interesting is that they have something called waxy flexibility, which means if you hold their body in unusual or weird positions, then they will actually not move. They'll stay exactly the same. So if you're a fan of mannequins, that's what you should do. Catatonia is a presentation of extreme psychosis, and if it's not treated, then it can turn into a life-threatening problem because people, they can't even eat. As it happens, Catatonia is also an alternative 90s Welsh rock band, and if you're as old as me, you might remember their breakout hit Road Rage, but that's not important right now. So Yates was discharged 10 days later, despite the fact that she was still depressed, she was still mute. She was only discharged because her sleeping and her eating had improved. And as I think I've made clear, in my view, she was discharged far too early. Particularly when you look at the risk factors, you know, she had all these young children at home. I don't have her medical notes, obviously, but to me, on the surface, this looks like clinical negligence. I carry out clinical negligence cases as an expert witness for the civil court, as well as all the stuff that I do for the criminal court. And I have to say, if this came across my desk, I would have serious criticisms about the psychiatrist that was treating Yates. So Yates was taken to hospital yet again and discharged yet again after this. And after that, the psychiatrist tried to wean her off her antipsychotic drugs, which is, to me, is just like an alarming mistake. I mean, the very fact that she's had so many hospital admissions in such a short period of time obviously means that Yates is seriously unwell, that her illness is just recurrent, it's not something that's going to go away. So even if she was ready for discharge at that point, which frankly I don't think she was, even if she was, then if it was me, she should have continued her antipsychotic medication for the indefinite future, absolute minimum 6 months or a year, probably longer. Apparently Yates' husband asked the psychiatrist about restarting the antipsychotic and he refused, although he did suggest ECT, which, as I said in my previous video, is a reasonable choice. Apparently the psychiatrist said to Yates 2 days before the killing of her children that she had to think positive thoughts, which is just even probably more useless in the treatment of psychosis than, I don't know, homeopathy or a witch doctor. And if you're watching this and you're a homeopathy practitioner, what the hell are you doing? No, I'm only kidding, no offense. But seriously, what the hell are you doing? And if you're watching this and you're a witch doctor, put a curse on me. I dare you. Okay, so the next question. Why didn't Yates initially get a defense of not guilty by reason of insanity? So the killings happened in June 2001, but the insanity defense was rejected by a jury in March 2002. Instead, what happened is she was found guilty of multiple murders and she was sentenced to prison. Eventually, she had a new trial in 2006 and she was acquitted by reasons of insanity, and she was committed to a state mental hospital. As it happens, the state of Texas, where this all happened, used the exact same not guilty by reason of insanity rules as England. And I am very familiar with these rules because I've actually given evidence in court for them before, and they are called the M'Naghten rules. They're often mistakenly called the McNaughton rules. I've seen this in actual court reports, I've seen it even in textbooks, but if anybody calls it that, they are amateurs. They're called the M'Naghten rules, M'(Naghten). And they are that if the defendant is suffering from a defect of reason, which is caused by a disease of the mind, and they did not know the nature or the quality of the act, so they didn't actually understand what they were doing, or they didn't know that it was legally wrong, then they can have this defense. And this always relies on the evidence of a forensic psychiatrist. So Yates clearly had several symptoms. I mentioned these in the last episode. To summarize, she had multiple delusions, including paranoid delusions, delusions of reference, where she was convinced that something neutral or insignificant like the radio or the TV was referring to her directly. She had auditory hallucinations, she was hearing voices about stabbing. She had visual hallucinations, she was seeing like shapes in the wall. So in my view, she clearly would have met the criteria because she believed that her kids were not developing. She believed that she was marked by Satan, and she thought that the only way to save her children from hell was to kill them. And I genuinely think that she had these beliefs, because it wasn't like she killed her children in an act of rage and tried to cover it up. Not at all. In fact, she called the police immediately after she did it, and she called her husband to tell him what happened. So that begs the question, why didn't the jury agree with not guilty by reason of insanity? So I think there is a couple of factors here. I think that her crime was so unpalatable that the jury perhaps didn't care if she was mentally unwell. They just wanted to see her being punished. This reminds me of the case of the Yorkshire Ripper, where something similar happened. Go check out my previous episode if you want to know more about that. But another major factor, and the factor that actually led her to being granted a new trial in 2006, leads me on to my next question, which is, what was the false testimony in this case? So there was some controversy about the expert witness evidence of a man named Dr. Dietz, who is a forensic psychiatrist who was hired by the prosecution. Right, firstly, he had no expertise in postnatal depression, in postnatal mental illness at all. Next, he hadn't treated a patient since 1982, so maybe he was doing private work or maybe he was just doing court work. Although he had given evidence in some high-profile cases such as Jeffrey Dahmer. Personally, I think because postnatal depression is quite niche, I don't think the expert has to have expertise in that particular illness, although in my view they should have expertise in like psychosis in general, and they should have obviously a strong understanding of medico-legal issues such as not guilty by reason of insanity. And also, some experts are retired from clinical practice. That's not unusual, but 20 years, I mean, that is a long time. And this is a high profile case, you know, the murder of 5 children. This is very serious. So personally, I'm a bit dubious if he was the right choice. So Dr. Yates testified that Yates was not insane, and he said that she knew what she was doing was wrong because she expressed the belief that it was Satan, not God, that ordered her to kill the children. So Dr. Yates acknowledged that she was mentally unwell, but he didn't think it was that severe. And I have to say, I do wonder whether he was being objective and neutral as all expert witnesses are supposed to be. So when I give evidence in court, it doesn't matter whether I'm instructed by the Crown Prosecution Service or the defence. My evidence is only for the court. It has to be honest, objective, neutral. Whereas to me, it looked like Dr. Yates was like hoping to win the case. So from my understanding, Yates felt compelled to listen to Satan, and the only way to save her children from hell was to kill them. So it doesn't matter, in my view, that it was from Satan. In her mind, she was doing what she thought was the right thing to do. She was doing what she felt she had to do. So I disagree with Dr. Yates. And also, just on a simpler level, it doesn't make logical sense, does it? If somebody's completely raving mad and they're hearing voices that have influenced their actions, does it make sense that it's the voice of God, then they go to hospital for treatment, but if it was the God of Satan, then they go to prison or even executed? Apparently, the lawyer hired by the Yates family stated, and I quote, "If this woman doesn't meet the test of insanity in this state, then nobody does. We might as well wipe it from the books." End quote. Bit dramatic, but I agree with him. So Dr. Yates worked as a private consultant to popular TV shows, including Law & Order. And he testified that just before the killing, there was an episode about a mother with postnatal depression who had drowned her children and who was found not guilty by reason of insanity. So I think he was basically insinuating that Yates had seen this program and got her ideas from the TV program. However, the twist is no such episode had been made or had aired. So because of this false testimony, the case was eventually overturned and there was a new trial granted, which is actually a pretty big deal when you think about it, because this woman, Yates, who should have been taken to hospital for treatment, was imprisoned for years, several years, for being punished. So my next question is, when will she be released? Well, this depends entirely on her rehabilitation and how it goes, and it's the decision of the Consultant Forensic Psychiatrist. So the best case scenario for Yates is that with antipsychotic treatments, she remains symptom-free for a long period of time and that she manages to engage in rehabilitation. So having worked in several forensic psychiatric secure units, I can tell you that the rehabilitation there is complex, it's detailed. I'll talk you through what it entails fully in a future episode of A Psych for Sore Minds. But just to give you a very brief taste, it would involve medication, obviously, in-depth psychology such as relapse prevention. So the psychologist would sit with Yates for many, many sessions. They would help her determine and recognize the warning signs of when she might become unwell again in the future. On top of all this, Yates would need to show that she's stable, that she's free from psychotic symptoms, and given how risky her index offense was, she'd probably have to be stable for many, many years. She would need to show insight and compliance into taking her medication in the long term. So if she does all of these things, and if there's no risk-free behaviour, then the next step would be for her to have leave. Initially escorted leave, so escorted with nurses, then unescorted leave, and then after all of this, she could potentially be released into the community in the future, under supervision, regular appointments, regularly seeing her psychiatrist and seeing nurses. From my experience, I would say this would probably realistically take anything between 8 to 12 years. However, if Yates is treatment resistant, if her symptoms are not easily assuaged by antipsychotic medication, or if she's indicated that she's not willing to take them, or if there's any risk behaviours such as like aggression while she's actually in psychiatric hospital, then all of these factors can delay her discharge for many, many more years. Potentially in a case like this, it's possible that she might stay in hospital for the rest of her life. Let's get on to a really interesting question now. Would this or could this have happened in the UK? So I'm a forensic psychiatrist, I do expert witness work, and I've actually given evidence in a similar case to this more than once. So that's mothers that have killed their children, so that's infanticide. I've never obviously seen a case quite as horrific as this with 5 victims, but the very fact that I've seen similar cases obviously means that it is possible in the UK. As I said before, I think there were many failings in her psychiatric care. She attempted suicide by an overdose. She was discharged after that before she was fully ready. Another time she was discharged on antipsychotics and the psychiatrist tried to cut them down and decrease the dose before she was fully well. I don't think this would have happened in the UK. I think the treatment would have been a lot more thorough and long term. So potentially that could have meant that Yates gained more insight. She might have chosen to take an antipsychotic medication because she got insight and she was taught exactly what her illness is and how to recognize it. There's more of a chance, I think, that she would have taken her medication, so that potentially could have stopped her relapsing down the line, which would have stopped the eventual murders, in my view. However, I should say that it's also possible that she could have had all of this extra rehabilitation in the UK and still not had insight, or still refused to take antipsychotic medication, still might have gotten well down the line. The murders could have happened. So it's not just dependent on the treatment, it's also dependent on her insight and her attitude. And obviously there are external kind of factors like how good the psychiatrists were that she saw in the UK. The other thing I would say is that in the UK, I'm not sure about what it's like in the States, especially in the last decade or so, there's been a growth in perinatal psychiatry, not just the care and the mother and baby units in the hospitals, but actually as a specialty. So there are specialist perinatal psychiatrists now, which didn't exist about 20 years ago. If Yates was picked up by one of these professionals, she would have been reviewed and observed much more thoroughly. And each time she had a child, she would be observed in case her symptoms might have recurred. So this potentially means that she might have been admitted to hospital earlier, and that might have prevented the murders. So it's specialist mother and baby units. They have nurses that help with the care of the babies. They have equipment from nappies to cots. They're basically much nicer, more pleasant environments than general psychiatric wards. And they're only for young mothers and their babies. There's no other general psychiatric patients. So it's a more settled, comfortable environment, so it's more likely that people, including Yates, would want to stay in these environments. Okay, so I've taught you loads of my brain stuff. Now, dear viewers, I have some questions for you. Please let me know your answers in the comments below. So my questions are, have you ever heard of any interesting miscarriages of justice, either related to mental illness or not? Please tell me about it. Also, there was a possibility that Yates could have been executed, so I want to know what you think about the death penalty. And I'm kind of putting my brethren in the firing line here, but do you know of any cases where there has been substandard care by a psychiatrist? Let me know what happened and what the consequences were. Okay, almost done. After the break, I want to tell you what's coming soon on this channel, A Psych for Sore Minds. So I'm going to tell you about the next episode of A Psych for Sore Minds, but first I'm really excited to share some news with you guys, which is that I'm going to be a speaker at CrimeCon UK in June in London this year. I'm going to have a different video on this channel if you want to see what my talk is about, go check it out. But you cannot miss this event if you're a real true crime enthusiast. There's a link in below if you want to get tickets. If you use the code PSYCH, then you get 10% off your ticket. Okay, coming soon on this channel, I'm going to do a series about alcohol and its complex relationship to both mental illness and offending. And I'm going to tell you about some real life cases that I've assessed. I've intentionally picked lots of different cases from different kind of angles and perspective because I'm such a nice guy. I'm also going to do a shorter set of videos about some specific psychiatric diagnoses, and I'm going to answer some questions about mental health issues from the internet. So is your index finger functioning? Can you press buttons? In that case, please press subscribe. It helps me out immeasurably, but on top of that, it actually makes all bunnies within a 10-mile radius more fluffier. Please comment and tell me what you think of my videos. Give me some ideas to chat about. I love interacting with the viewers. Follow us on Facebook, on Instagram. Submit any questions or any ideas for episodes that you have to our email address, which is psychforsoreminds@gmail.com. If you're going to reference us, #PsychSore. Lastly, please tell your favourite people about Psych for Sore Minds because they deserve it. Spread the love. Until next time, stay euthymic and please remember, I love you.